Okay, we are beginning. Thank you so much. Welcome and greetings from New Jersey. I want to thank you for joining us today and for being on time. If you are ready to participate in the session, send me a thumbs up by clicking on your reactions icon at the bottom of your window or typing in "I'm ready" in the chat box. Okay, that means that we're ready to start. Stephanie, are we seeing responses?
Yes, I actually saw so many hands go up, so this is an excited group.
Okay, great. We have 111 participants just ready to hear all of the great information that we're going to share. So I'm so happy to be with you here on this lovely Tuesday with all of you, and we're going to get started. Okay. So I am your moderator for today's Raising Voices webinar sponsored by Proceed's National Center for Training, Support, and Technical Assistance. And my name is Brenda Cruz-Scotton. I am manager at the center, and I'm also accompanied by several team members, including Stephanie Campos, who is the program coordinator at NASA, and Shayra Marinez, who is our program support specialist. They will both be working with me today in the role of managing Zoom logistics and the chat box, the question and answer feed, and also the session polls that we will be launching. Our NASA team is really happy to have you spend the next hour and a half with us discussing a very important topic: transgender and non-binary competence and intersectionality. So thank you once again for joining us, and we're gonna get started. The title for today's Raising Voices webinar, which is the fourth in the series, is Transgender Competence and Quality Care, Understanding the Dynamics of Intersectionality. We have a full agenda and much information to share with you. However, before we delve into the meat of the topic, let's go over a couple of items. Okay, so I want to go over a couple of the Zoom features that we will be using in this session and some logistical items. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording, the PowerPoint slide set, the resources will be available afterwards and will be posted on our YouTube channel. Your microphone has been muted and will remain muted for the duration of this webinar. We will be taking questions during the question and answer segment, and you will be able to ask the speaker of your choice or direct questions to both speakers. You can also type your questions during the presentation into the question box in your Zoom control panel. We will be checking the questions and the chat box. You can use the chat box as well throughout the session. In addition, the speakers will be responding to questions directly in the question box. So if you post a question in the question box, please check back in to see if it was answered by one of the speakers. And also, we will have opportunities to take questions during 2 question and answer segments after each panelist presentation. If you have any questions apart from the topic for today, you can please chat in those questions to Stephanie Campos or Shayra Marinez, who are our sessions producers, and they can respond to those questions for you. So we want to inform you that this session is part of a webinar series sponsored sponsored by Proceed NASA's CBER for Health Equity program, which is funded by Centers for Disease Control. We would love it if you used our hashtags Proceed CBER for Equity and Raising Voices, and follow us on our social media sites and spread the word about our trainings and our technical assistance services and our content. And you can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn using those hashtags as well. Okay, so today's topic is an extremely important one. You are community-based service providers, healthcare providers, case managers, advocates, and also members of the LGBTQ and Two-Spirit community. Let's go over a couple of session agreements to ensure that we have a productive, impactful, and safe session today. And the agreements are to please respect all opinions and perspectives. Let's observe confidentiality. Please participate actively in the dialogue today. and do your part to make this a safe zone for everyone to share, express, ask questions, and learn. And we also want you to enjoy the session, most importantly. So I am just going to check one thing really quick. Okay. Okay. So we're gonna get to know each other. So we're gonna first launch a couple of polls. So what we want you to do is to just please answer them so that we can get to know a little bit about you. So Stephanie, can you please launch our polls?
Absolutely. So first question, in which region of the US is your organization located? And we already see all these responses coming in quickly. Are you in the West, Midwest, South, Northeast, or Caribbean? We're almost there. %75% of the votes are in. Just a few more moments. And we're going to close it in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. So it looks like 56% of everyone is coming from the Northeast, whoop, whoop, as Jerseyans, and the rest from the South, Midwest, and the West.
Yes. Okay. It's a good mix, definitely. I thought we did have some Caribbean folks that said hello to me on the line. Okay. Thank you. So Stephanie, go to the next one.
Okay. So next question is, what type of organization do you represent? Are you with a hospital or medical group? Are you with a community-based organization, a government agency, whether federal, state, or local, a federally qualified health center or community-based clinic, or other? So the responses are coming in. We're going to give you all just a minute or two, and then we're going to share the results. Okay, so we're going to close it in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so it looks like the majority are 31% coming work with a community-based organization, 27% are other. Please chat in the box. Yeah, we see it coming in already. University student, psychology student, university student, welcome. We have some 16% from a federally qualified health center or clinic, and 18% from another government agency, as well as hospital and medical group practice.
That's great. A nice mix. Yes. Okay, and I believe we have one more.
We have one more. You're absolutely right. So the last question is, which of these groups best describes your position within your organization? Are you in a leadership, director, manager, supervisor role, mid-management coordinator, specialist educator, frontline, which would include clinician, provider, counselor, or frontline non-clinical, outreach worker, tester, case manager, or other? They are coming in. We're almost there. And thank you everyone for answering these poll questions. We always want to get to know who's out there here with us today. So we're going to close it in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay.
Great, and I saw some university students are also participating. We want to welcome everyone. Yes. Okay, thank you for participating in these polls. It's helpful to know what types of organization you represent, what types of positions you hold in your work. And also interesting to know in one part of the US you are connecting with us from today. So again, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedules today to participate in this session and to let us know a little bit about who you are. Okay, so now I'd like to go over today's learning objectives. So by the end of the session, US participants will be able to realize the impact of cultural humility on the provision of services for persons who are transgender and or non-binary. You will be able to understand a little bit more intersectionality from the perspective of persons who are transgender and or non-binary. You will be able to learn how to explore the unique challenges and specific needs of transgender and non-binary persons in a culturally competent and collaborative manner. And you will be able to become familiar with the complex legal, mental, social, and health systems which persons who are transgender and non-binary have to navigate, often in an inequitable manner. Okay, so, and this is how we're going to accomplish these learning objectives. I'm not going to read this slide, but please take a moment to review the topics that we'll be discussing today's session so that you can see, from this slide that we have a full plate of content. But I'm confident that we'll be moving through the topics efficiently with enough time for you to also ask your questions. So I'm going to pause here for a moment so that you can take a look at the segments, at the segments and content and topics that we will be discussing today. Okay, so here are our guest speakers, and I will provide you with some background information on each, and then we will hear from our first speaker. So our first speaker is Alexa Rodriguez, who is the director of the Trans Latinx DMV. Alexa is originally from El Salvador and leads the Trans Latinx DMV in the Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia area, which is a regional chapter of the National Trans Latina Coalition. The Trans Latinx organization is a two-spirit-led organization that addresses the needs of Black and Indigenous Trans Latinx people living in the DMV area, the DC, Maryland, and Virginia area. Alexa is also the founder of a support group in El Salvador called Mi Nueva Familia, My New Family, for transgender women and people living with HIV. She has worked with and has developed long-standing relationships with many organizations, including the Washington, D.C. Department of Health, and has been awarded many recognitions for her outstanding work. Alexa's passion lies in defending transgender rights and people living with HIV, and has been an activist for 16 years. She continuously fights for the rights of people with HIV and to increase equity for the transgender community. As a transgender woman herself with HIV, Alexa will continue to fight to make sure her community does not fail. Now, our second speaker is Celeste Fiori. Celeste Fiori is the founder and chair of the Trans Affirming Alliance, based in New Jersey, and a partner at the Argentino Fiori Law and Advocacy LLC, also based in New Jersey. Celeste Fiori's work as an LGBT educator, activist, and advocate began when they were an undergraduate at American University, where Celeste led an LGBT organization, was president of the Outlaws, the LGBT law student group at Rutgers University School of Law, and they continue to advocate for the advancement of LGBT rights. Celeste also regularly presents and writes on LGBT issues for local and national organizations. Celeste serves as a trustee of the New Jersey School Boards Association, NJSBA, as is past chair of the LGBT rights section of the NJSBA, is appointed to the Essex County, New Jersey Advisory Committee on Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement, and if that isn't enough, serves on the New Jersey Supreme Court Advisory Committee on Public Access to Court Records. So we, as you can see, as you can imagine, we are so pleased to have them both as our guest speakers today. So again, I want to thank you both for taking your time and participation again. I know I've thanked you, but I want to thank you once again. Okay, so we are now going to dive into today's content, with our first speaker, who is Alexa Rodriguez. So Alexa, let me just make sure that she able to speak.
Can you hear
Okay.
me?
Hello, yes. Alexa, do you want to start off by sharing where you are?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
So thank you for having me. Thank you everyone for being here. This is amazing for me. It has been a journey. I'm in El Salvador. I was planning to go home by Sunday, and something happened, and I was stuck in El Salvador for 2 days, and now I'm in the airport. So, but I cannot miss this opportunity to share my experience with you and learning together. So thank you for being here. Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you, Alexa, so much. I know that you're sort of in
And yes,
transit,
let's go ahead and start it.
okay, so yes, let's go. So Alexa, please talk to us about cultural competence and cultural humility. Tell us why demonstrating cultural humility is most important in providing services to transgender and non-binary persons, and why should service providers make it their task to learn about and demonstrate cultural humility?
Yes, it's so important to practice cultural humility because it's something that we are learning. Every time we are learning more and more from our clients and our the people that we serve. And the difference between those are like when you're giving cultural competence, it's your competence serving. Um, for example, transgender and gender non-binary community. But with cultural humility, you will be learning every time along your life. And that's really important because that's from you, from what you do, and from what you learn from your clients. So, for example, the diversity in our community is really big. With cultural competence, you will learn about the gender, the pronouns, the chosen name, and so. But with cultural humility, you will learn more about the transgender communities. That there's a diversity between inside the diversity. Like a transgender person can be gay, can be lesbian, or it can be indigenous, can be a person of color. So you will be learning that with cultural humility. And
Thank
like
you, Alexa.
yes, go ahead.
So before we move on, I want to delve in a little further. So Alexa and Celeste too, I'd like to involve you in this question. So if you can unmute yourself. How do transgender and non-binary persons determine if someone is demonstrating cultural humility? In other words, how do transgender and non-binary persons see that one, say a service provider, is actually expressing cultural humility?
Yes, that's a really good question. And or cultural humility will be will feeling safe in the space. Like it means like you treating the community with respect, with dignity, using the right pronouns, the right children name, and the person will be feeling safe, and you will be connecting with this person, and the provider will be able to create a better relationship, and they will be continue coming, because when we are not doing cultural competence or cultural humility, many of our clients, they don't come back because the competence start with the security guard at the door, with the front desk person, with the nurse, with the medical provider. And when some of these persons don't apply the cultural competence or the cultural humility, that individual will not come back to that space.
Thank you, Celeste. Do you have any thoughts on the question as well?
Yeah, and this is something that I know that I'll talk about is making sure that we're asked, like trans and non-binary people are asked questions that recognize the fact that we exist. such as, you know, making sure that there are appropriate gender options for everyone to select, and to make it clear that even if your name on certain government documents is one thing, that you will be called the name that you want to be called on another document. And another thing that I know that I've noticed within the trans and non-binary community is that we function very much on word of mouth. So if one community member says, hey, I had a negative experience with this provider, that will get spread throughout the community, because we want to make sure that we're keeping each other safe. So it's really important that you are, you know, you're obviously treating everybody with dignity and respect, but any community that operates on word of mouth, and trans and non-binary people absolutely do, it's even more important. And then just one little thing, if just being careful about what clinicians or frontline folks are saying when there's other potential clients around, because transgender people, we are listening to make sure it's going to be safe for us. So if there's a negative comment made about another client or another practitioner, that is definitely something that we are highly attuned to and are looking for our own personal safety. So cultural humility is really important at all levels of an organization.
Thank you so much.
Yes. And never assume something from the person that you're serving. Never assume. It's better to ask properly if you have any doubts, but never assume.
Okay, thank you. So Alexa, in terms of key terminology, can you please explain some of the terminology that is crucial for health, social, mental health, legal, and all service providers to know and understand?
Yeah, you know, gender is very something social that society created, especially the heterosex, the heteronormative society create for role male or female, and that's what we know in the community. It's really easy, right? And some people can identify with that. And in every community, for example, I'm a transgender woman, and sometimes I present myself as a woman with trans experience. And because transgender is not an identity, it's not a gender, it's not a third gender with like other cultures have. But in general, gender is more like social roles that has been given to people.
Okay. And so this, can you tell us a little bit more about the other terminology that some people include here, genderqueer, agender, bigender?
Sure, in the slide says, some other people that doesn't identify as male or female, we have non-binary community, right? For those who doesn't, so people whose gender is not male or female, or can be both, right? So it doesn't mean that don't have to be male or female, but also means that the person can be both or none, right? It doesn't have to have. Other people use genderqueer, gender, bigender, and many more. And we are using that in the community. And that's when people outside of our community need to learn, because everyone has their own identity.
Okay, great. Thank you. So here, this next slide mentions cisgender, transgender, and then other terminology that people refer to as female to male and male to female.
Yes, so for a cis person,
Okay,
it's
Alexa, did you want to comment on this slide?
they're not in relating to a person who brain is, I don't want to in assign with their assigned gender at birth. So that's a cisgender person. transgender person is an umbrella term relating to being a person whose gender identity differs from their body or the gender assigned at birth. Female to male is an all term, or like male to female, that is it used to be used by the providers, the medical provider, because they wanted to know which population of which people are working with. So they used to use this terminology. In the transmasculine community, there sometimes they use the male to female, or I'm sorry, the female to male, but to identify themselves or between their community. And I will say this with strongly, like, cis people don't, please don't use this term. If you're not part of the community, don't use it because it's not belong to you. And so this is really important to respect that this term, the female to male or male to female, is specific for our community who identify like that.
Okay, and then we have the next slide, which discusses two-spirit and mute.
Yes, two-spirit, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but it's an umbrella term for LGBTIQ plus community and indigenous. So they have these two identities with themselves. In other cultures, they used to use like two-spirit to identify a transgender woman or a transgender man, but it's not the point. The two-spirit begun in Canada, I guess, and has been spreading all over the world. But using that means the person is LGBT, part of the LGBT community and the indigenous community. And there's other cultures like Mushe in Mexico to identify a transgender woman or una mujer transgénero, and Isra in India, where they use that like a third gender, and I'm okay with that only for safety reason of the trans community there. And there's more all over the world. We have seen that our ancestors respect our community in the past. And so over the years, the heteronormativity has putting us aside and treating us with dignity. But if we look back, we will see that in our culture, we has been all over the year because we have been here for many years and we're going anywhere.
Thank you. Very interesting. This next slide speaks about the Native American community.
Yes, so Native American, our community from not only from the United States, but all over the continent, right? From Canada, Alaska, and to Argentina and all the American continent. But this terminology is used in the United States to identify people native from the US before the Columbus came here, right? The European people came here. So we were here before them. This is really important, and I think this is important to go with cultural competence, because many times we don't know that transgender person who is immigrant or is migrating to another country or isn't documented. And I wanted to talk about this because for a transgender person who isn't documented, they will not have documents that reflects their gender or their gender presentation. So it's really important to know that. And for an immigrant, is a person who comes to live permanently in a foreign country. Migrant is a person who moves from one place to another, looking for better condition that is not in their country of birth. An undocumented person is a person who's not record and documentation from the United States. We don't use illegal. No human being is illegal in this world. So we are prohibited to use that terminology because it's violent for any communities. And colonizer is a country that sends settles to place and establish political control over things that we have been facing from in the whole Americas and other countries.
Okay. Thank you, Alexa. Such useful and really helpful information. So I know that even many people here in this session would agree that intersectionality is not the easiest concept to understand. Alexa, can you please explain intersectionality, particularly how it relates to transgender and non-binary persons so that we can gain a better understanding?
Yes, it's really hard to understand. It's really hard to explain because people don't get it, right? Like we were talking about in the past about the gender identity being in the and you can see in the image about race, education, sexuality, ability, all these things can have easily can change based in on the race, on the class, on the language, on the culture. And that's when everything intersections and can create barriers for people to be able to get the services that they need, that they are seeking for. And so it's really, really, really hard for medical providers, for people who serve community to be able to recognize when a person is in the middle of this all this intersectionality. For example, I'm a transgender woman, I'm an indigenous, I'm an immigrant, I'm HIV positive, but I have all the privilege over my community. Like I'm undocumented now. I'm a I think I can speak English. But I can communicate. It's less barrier for me even when I have this background. So that's kind of the explanation that I have. I know it sounds confusing sometimes, but we can learn together.
Definitely, and we could talk a little bit more about that. So Alexa and actually Celeste, tell us what forms of inequity or discrimination have you experienced due to your identities and I guess the intersectionality of your various identities? Alexa, we'll start with you.
Yes, personally, I was undocumented, right? And I was taking for HIV medication because I wanted to be healthy. And because of that, my my process to get access to the medication took longer. Then I passed all the privilege that I don't have. So we can be in the same seeking for the same services, but we both are treated differently. So that's kind of the intersectionality affects us or create barriers to get access to services in the community. And there's some data here, like among the 20,017 respondents of the 2015 United States Transgender Survey, 24% reported the past year transgender related housing discrimination. That means that just because their gender identity, they has been discriminated or not having access to housing. And that's ridiculous because some other person, like a cisgender person, can have access just because they are cisgender. And that's horrible just to hear that is happening.
What about you, Celeste? What would you like to contribute to that question? What forms of inequity?
Yeah, I know that I'm incredibly privileged. I was born a United States citizen. I am a native speaker of English. I am white, and I get a lot of white privilege. I am educated. I'm a lawyer. But I still, because I'm transgender and because I am more female bodied than not, I am not, I'm often asked when my attorney is coming to court. I am called ma'am or young lady in a very diminutive. So not only is that not my gender identity or my pronoun, but I am still talked down to, and I know that I have to be, where I feel like I have to be more of a model minority in order to just gain the same respect that my cisgender, white, binary colleagues might need to do in order to get.
Thank you. This ends, actually, Celeste just spoke, touched upon this a little bit, but Alexa, can you tell us more about cisgender privilege and white privilege?
Yeah, so let's put some examples about the intersectionality, but also the privilege that a person can have. And many people have been, many transgender people has been banned for participating of military, healthcare, sport, bathroom. That's something essential that everyone have. Housing, economical justice, immigration rights in the past. So many things that we get for granted for cisgender folks, we are banned, we are put in aside or discriminated against. So yeah.
Okay, so I do have a question, another question for the both of you. So what 2 or 3 items do you want service providers to remember most, or a take-home message related to intersectionality from the perspective of transgender and non-binary persons?
Celeste, do you want to go first?
Sure. Because no two people are alike, no two transgender people are alike, and there are a lot of ways in which somebody's diversity or other aspects of their identity other than the one that they might be presenting to you are impacting their need to access particular services or other barriers that are preventing them from accessing other necessary services.
Yes, yes. I just will add that the trans community is not a monolith, you know? We are not a monolith, we are so diverse, and people have to respect that, and don't assume, don't assume, please.
Okay. Thank you. So Alexa, please take us through these suggestions.
Yes, some suggestions to becoming an effective transgender and gender non-binary allies. I like to use the learning allies is the best term for a person who wants to be our allies or want to be with us and working with us. So, but some bullet points here say don't use, do use appropriate gender pronouns. That means ask. If you don't know, I think I saw a question like what you do when you don't remember the pronouns. You can ask, like you can, instead of ask, you know what? You can say your pronouns. Like, my name is Alexa and I use she, her pronouns. How about you? That would be the better way to address that. Don't use chosen name for, do you choose, use the proper name, I will say. If you see that the person doesn't have an ID that doesn't match the gender expression, ask properly. Like, what is your name? Don't say prefer name. Don't say prefer pronouns. That doesn't exist, right? Because we don't prefer to be something or someone. We are someone. And ask the proper questions. Don't ask, have you had a surgery before? Have you, do you got the bottom surgery? Those kind of questions, no, please don't do it. Step back, if it's necessary, if you want to have someone with you, don't speak for them, you know, for the trans community and gender non-binary. If you will invite someone, let them to be the presenter, let them be themselves. Hire more transgender and gender non-binary person whenever it's possible in your staff as a staff, you know, because when you have a transgender or gender non-binary staff, community will feel safer because they will see they have representation there. Invest in transgender and gender non-binary community, you know, especially in transgender-led organization. Love us, you know, love is really important in all communities. If we love each other, we will have a better world. And this is a pageant queen question.
Thank you so much. This is very valuable information that both of you have already shared with us. And we are going to pause for some questions before we move into the next segment. We want to have our speakers respond to some questions that our attendees had here today, and also questions that were sent to us when folks registered. And we do also have some frequently asked questions that we want the both of you to weigh in. So let's start. I would like to start with the questions that were sent to us by the registrants, and then we'll move on to questions that are possibly in the Q&A, the question box, or in the chat box. So the first question that I'd like to pose that came through from one of our registrants is, what are your thoughts related to adolescent trauma caused by early gender affirming surgery and the ethics behind allowing persons under the age of 18 to decide to have this surgery? And this is more or less exactly how the question came through when the person registered. So, Celeste, would you like to take a stab at it first?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it. So I think the question assumes some facts that I don't think are substantiated by any of the research or science, that there is adolescent trauma caused by gender affirming surgeries if they happen under the age of 18. I sent Brenda a few articles that show that the research from like the American Medical Association and the Journal of Pediatrics, like, you know, reputable medical organizations that say that doing any sort of affirmation has better health outcomes, whether or not it's social affirmation, like making sure that you're using somebody's proper name and pronouns, but also any sort of hormonal interventions. So it like a puberty blocker for somebody who's just started puberty to kind of push the pause on either, you know, estrogen or testosterone, started puberty. And then there's an organization called WPATH. It's the World Professional Association of Transgender Health. And there are definitely some issues with WPATH. However, they issue standards of care that a lot of medical providers follow. And most of the time, a surgical intervention is not necessarily recommended for somebody under the age of 18, but it's on a case-by-case basis. So actually, it's under 16. But as with anything, it's whether or not the person can give or can get and receive informed consent for any procedures that they're undergoing, and to have access to them. So in short, there really isn't any legitimate research to say that a surgical intervention for somebody under the age of 18 is traumatic. Anecdotally and research-based, it's actually the opposite, that not having life-affirming medical care is what brings about trauma. So that's my very long-winded answer to that very in-depth and detailed question.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. Alexa, would you like to comment as well?
Just a small comment. I work referring transgender and gender non-binary clients to to gender affirming surgeries. And believe me, when a person have the surgery, their lives change. That doesn't mean that all the trans community have to have surgery to be affirming, you know? It's everyone's decision, and the consent is really important to respect and to talk about when you're a provider.
Thank you. Okay, another question that came through from our registrants is, what are your tips on addressing unconscious bias towards transgender and or non-binary persons?
That's really tough. Um, I think we all have biases. Even myself, I have it. I think addressing it in a good way, learning more, it will be I don't know. I don't even know how to answer that question. That's really hard for me.
I think it's so much easier to maybe see it in other people. And so if you feel like you're seeing it in somebody else, or you hear something that just doesn't feel like kind and loving, think about whether or not you've ever said something like that, or in what situation you might feel the same way, and that might give you a glimpse into what's going on in your own mind. But it's so much easier to see in other people.
Yeah.
So another question is, what are ways to address the targeting of transgender individuals by corporations that want to use or exploit them? For example, in the tobacco industry.
Wow. I think that question is for you, Celeste. You're the lawyer.
Oh, thanks, Alexa. I just think it's really important to have people be empowered for who they are, and to if there's somebody, particularly a young person, who is looking to fit in or find a sense of community, one way that in capitalist cultures we do that is by buying products or wearing something of a certain label. But if there's actually a social group or a meetup group or some other way to find and be connected with your community in a healthy way, rather than buying cigarettes and drinking alcohol, then providing those options and those avenues are some positive ways that we can avoid exploitation of trans people by corporations.
Yeah, and I think we have to consider also tokenizing our community, like or in presentation or panelists and all that, but also using our community as teachers or educators in trans competence. Like when a person comes to a medical provider and they start asking questions instead of giving the services, because I want to learn, so teach me. That's not appropriate, so don't do that. We normally go to services to get served. And so if you want to learn more, don't use your clients as educators. Hire someone to educate. So don't use us that way.
Thank you. Really important point. Yes. Okay, the fourth question that came through is, do you think it is wise for parents to raise their kids gender neutral?
That would be awesome. Because it's the little person is who know their gender identity, who know themselves. And I think it's amazing if someone do that. I think I know some couple of people who does that, and it's really important because that means that the parents are listening to their kids. So yes, definitely.
Celeste, what are your thoughts on that question?
Oh my goodness, that would have made my childhood so much easier.
Right.
Oh my goodness, I could have just dealt with the regular things like school and I don't know, school lunches or anything other than having to deal with all the pressures of gender. Oh, it's exhausting.
Definitely. And I think we have to push and do advocacy for governments who do the birth certificate to put a X mark in the gender, because it doesn't like genitals doesn't define a gender. So we have to do more advocacy on that for medical, the doctor to respect the gender identity of the person who just born, and not just put an attack on it, like on them, like to say is she or he or stuff like that, you know, stop violence for a little person.
Thank you so much. The next question is, how do you suggest presenting services to transgender students? I'm not sure of what age range the person was referring to, but presenting services to transgender students in a positive and approachable manner.
Yeah, I think before giving services to the community, uh, you will need a training and cultural humility and cultural competence to give the services, hire staff from the community, and yeah, the best approach is to their parents, right? Because like you say, if they're underage, we will have to have consent from their parents, with that sucks. Because sometimes parents don't get it, you know, especially cisgender parents.
Celeste?
Nothing to add.
Okay, so Stephanie, I'd like to just switch gears a little bit and see if there are any questions, maybe in the chat box or in the question box that we can take now, maybe one or two, and then we'll move on to the next segment.
Yes, we have a few questions that have come in. So the first one is it cultural appropriation if white/, non-indigenous people use the term two-spirit as an identity?
Big yes. Yeah, it's not right. It's a cultural appropriation. Many people think that it's a trending thing to do, but it's not appropriate.
Okay. Celeste, anything you want to add to that?
No.
Okay. The other question, actually, there was some conversation about it in the chat, but if you can both speak on this just for clarity, that'll be great, was how should I address someone when I don't know their pronouns? And Alexa did talk a little bit about this. So I don't know if there's just something else you want to add or just make your final statements on that.
Yeah, just don't assume, ask properly, present yourself and give your pronouns a name, and you will have an answer back to that.
And next question is, how do we get all 50 states on board with all transgender surgeries? Some procedures are still considered cosmetic and not covered by a lot of medical insurances. Big policy question.
Yeah, a lot of advocacy, right? A lot of demonstration, I don't know, but it's a lot of work to do, especially with private insurance, because they just want to do whatever they want. With Medicaid, we're working on it, especially in the DMV area. DC is a paradise for people who has DC Medicaid. Maryland is kind of working on there. Virginia is still behind, so we are on top of them. So hopefully there's other community-based organization or big organizations to do more advocacy on this, because yeah, their medical necessity is not cosmetic.
Lots of advocacy. Thank you. Celeste, anything you want to add on?
Yeah, and also to if you're getting denials for things that should be covered, the Transgender Defense and Legal Education Fund, TELDF, has a health advocacy arm, and it's staffed, and they'll help with appeals, but they also do impact litigation as well. So even if you are denied, that shouldn't be the end of the story. And if you're a medical provider doing some of that peer review advocacy on behalf of your clients to see if you can get things covered is vital work that we as regular people can't do on our own.
Well, that sounds like an
Oh,
excellent-
TELDF. I'll put TELDF into the chat for everybody.
Wonderful. Yeah, there seems to be a lot of interest on that. Thank you. And the other question is, do trans masculine cis passing individuals have a responsibility to use male privilege to uplift other members of the queer community?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Like, I think everyone is responsible to do whatever they want. It would be amazing if people with privilege that they are in the trans community or gender non-binary community will be like using their privilege to support others. That would be amazing. But, you know, we cannot force anyone to do that.
Use your privilege for good.
Yeah, just your privilege to help others.
Celeste, anything you want to add on?
Perfect.
Wonderful. And there's one last question. Why the word nosotros? Why the word nosotros? Where should people use it, and with what gender?
Actually say nosotres, which mean
Nosotres, perdón. Nosotres, that's what I
yeah.
meant.
Yes, in English will be they, them. But the thing in Spanish is really masculine, you know, so instead of using nosotros, which is the equal translation of they, them, or our, us, we use nosotres, we use ellas, we use, and also we use the E, in Español es la E. We use it to raise masculinity and also to be more inclusive. Of course, many people don't get it, but when we use it more and more, it will be more, people will be more familiar. So if you see a person that is non-binary and only speaks Spanish, please use ellas, you know, but if you don't feel comfortable using nosotros, ellas, use their name. Simple as that. Like, my name is Alexa. I don't want to use pronouns. Just call me Alexa. Every time, even if you get, if you feel tired using my name or repetitive, I don't care. Use my name. If you don't feel comfortable using pronoun.
Thank you. So we do have a few more questions, but I think some of these might be answered in the next presentation, and we are going to have another Q&A period. So keep them coming, and we will come back to them.
Yes. Okay. I just went ahead. Okay. So let me go here. Well, now it's time for our next segment. So now I'd like to pass the mic over to Celeste Fiori, our second speaker, and they will lead us through the next segment.
Thanks, Brenda. And Alexa, if you're still around, please, you know, jump in and chime in as you see fit or want to. So here's where I want to take us is I want to take you through a day as a transgender person or a non-binary person. And all of the photographs that are here, unless it's very clear, they are mine. So the picture here is of a gender neutral restroom, but it's only gender neutral from Tuesday, August 13th through Saturday, August 17th. Well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. However, if you take a step back and you think about your bathroom at home, it is gender neutral 24/7, 365 days a year. And if you think about the restrooms in your organizations, just wonder about that for a minute. And obviously, you know, transgender and gender non-binary cultural humility is not just about bathrooms. But I tend to notice bathrooms because there's usually something really ridiculous around them, like this. And I'm going to talk about a little bit more in depth on some of the systemic barriers and legal hurdles that transgender and gender non-binary or gender non-conforming people might have in accessing services. And then I just like to say the phrase advise, educate, and empower when you're dealing with anybody, but my community is the transgender community, so I'll talk about that briefly. Next. Okay, so thinking about your day, from the moment you wake up until the moment you go to sleep, how often does your gender or your perceived gender identity come up? I mean, just think about that. These are thought-provoking exercises, right? And how often do you hear news stories that impact your daily life? So for trans people, our gender identity can come up all of the time. From the moment we wake up until we turn on the news to see that there is yet another transgender person of color who is died under mysterious circumstances, and it's, you know, averages more than one person per month, and those are the people who have died that we know about. And in this picture is just funny to me. This is actually taken in a casino in Atlantic City. So there's this big glowing ladies sign, and then there's a tiny little gold sign on the door that also says ladies, and then there's a ladies sign. There's two ladies signs on the door. I don't know why it needed that many signs, but it absolutely does. And people have often said that transgender people, all they do is talk about gender all the time. And I say it is not transgender people who put all of those signs on the ladies' room door. Next slide, please. All right. So where are things gendered? Everywhere. When we watch the news, it's gendered. There's going to be a segment on, I don't know, the ladies' corner or gardening for women. If you're reading the newspaper, you're scrolling through Facebook, you're getting targeted ads based upon your gender. My kids really like to point out when there's something ridiculous, like a men's toothbrush. Like, I don't know what makes it for men other than it might be a different color, but it's kind of, I don't know. I find these things ridiculous. But every time you are encountering another human being, your gender identity comes up because somebody, in a lot of ways, because people are trying to figure out which honorific or title to call you. Should they call you sir? Should they call you ma'am? Should they call you something else? And that happens, you know, when you walk out your front door and you're interacting with a person at a restaurant or at a food truck or cart. Public transportation, a lot of cities had bus passes or other passes that had a little gender label on them. In Philadelphia, there was a huge lawsuit, maybe within the last 10 years, because the city refused to issue the correct bus pass with the right gender marker on it for transgender people. So then you go to your workplace, and I mean, this sort of goes on and on, but anytime you're going to interact with another person, or you might have to show your identification, or you could be asked for it, these are just places where transgender people can be discriminated against, denied care, put in physical danger of their lives, or harmed. And then I throw on here things that you might not think about, like pool passes. My town has men and women pool passes. They're the same thing. They're just like a little color. Why? I honestly don't know. And the biggest point of all of this is, if something's gendered and you can't figure out a good reason for it other than it's always been that way, then that is an opportunity to make something gender neutral and to then make it more accessible to anyone who might want to use it. That's not to say that there's not a place for he and she pronouns. It's just that a lot of these places where we interact could be more gender neutral, and I think create more of a space for people to get, you know, the food or the medical care or whatever they're trying to purchase at a store. Next, please. Okay, so these are real forms that I have filled out in medical offices. So if you look at the picture on the left, what I crossed off was women's health and just put reproductive. See, because I like to suggest my own edits. I did that after a car accident when I was getting a CAT scan. The CAT scan tech was not impressed and put me through the machine anyway. But why does this have to say women's health when it's asking about your last menstrual cycle? There are men who get their menses, so it could be labeled reproductive health. Same thing over here. I crossed out female only for are you pregnant? Come on, it's 2021. People with uteruses can get pregnant. Not everybody with a uterus is a woman. So just ask the question, are you pregnant? Because if you cannot get pregnant, nobody's going to be confused by answering that. Like it's either not applicable, yes or no. Next. And this is something that I have seen even an increase in, which is awesome. And it's the electronic ability to be able to select your pronouns. This one, the one on the left, was actually for an emergency vet I had to take my dog to the other day. And I was like, this is awesome. This isn't even medical care for me. This is just so that I, as a customer and a consumer, can have a better experience while paying way too much for my dog to have medical attention. And then I don't remember where the right one was from, but it might have been when I was signing up for a vaccine. So this is to show that that you can ask this question in pretty much any context if you're trying to create a better customer service or client service feel. Next. Oh yeah, that's it. There's my veterinary emergency group. And look at that. If you look at the one on the right, you can see that not only are they, them, theirs pronoun options, but Z, here, and hers are also, they're called neopronouns, but the fact that the veterinary emergency group has them listed goes to show that if you're actually working with human beings and providing services to them, you too can ask for what pronoun somebody uses. And then we know from survey data and just anecdotally that it is important for transgender people to have practitioners who are body positive, who understand transgender people, and to Alexa's point that we as the patient aren't having to be the teacher. Doctors have to go to continuing medical education courses, and they are not taught by patients in their waiting room. So it's equally inappropriate to ask somebody to teach you while you are supposed to be providing care to them. Next slide. Some of the really large systemic problems or systemic barriers that transgender people face, and Alexa mentioned this, is that people don't have identification documents that match who they are. And that's for a number of reasons. It could be that they don't have the money or ability to use the court process to change their names. And that's a court order is usually required to change your name on like a driver's license, a birth certificate, a passport, like a government issued document. But a court order and a formal name change is not required, especially in New Jersey, to use whatever name you use in your daily life. We're what's called a common law name change state, which means that if you use that name, it's your name. Doesn't matter what's on your identification, and you can sign with that name too. And what's really important here is that you people can have documents that have two different names on them and two different gender markers on them. So they could have a birth certificate that has one name and say an F gender marker, and they could have a driver's license that has another name and an M gender marker. And so this, and I'm sort of skipping around in my slides, but so this concept of what's in a legal name and what's your legal, gender are, they're just fictions. They don't actually exist. So if you're asking somebody for what their legal name is, you're asking the wrong question. So can you go to the next slide? Okay, so these are statistics from the United States Trans Survey, and everybody's going to get a copy of the PowerPoint. So this is just the data to back up what we know, which is that, you know, people they have to go to court and they get their name changed. And most of the time it happens, it just means that it might be expensive, or they might have a slightly negative experience getting into the court, or a negative experience with the judge or court staff themselves. So it's again, another place where somebody's gender could possibly, or gender presentation or gender expression could subject them to some sort of negative outcome. Again, contact with human beings. Next slide, please. All right. Name changes cost money, even if it's just a filing fee. Some states still have publication requirements. In New Jersey, you have to pay $25 for a certified copy of your name change order, which if you don't get one, you can't really change your name anywhere. Yes, there are fee waivers, but you have to make like less than 150% of the federal poverty line. So there's a narrow category of people for whom you can get a fee waiver, and each state is different in how their procedures go, but cost is definitely an issue for a lot of people. Next slide. So Alexa mentioned the fact that there's a lot of housing instability for transgender people. And we know that those statistics are exacerbated if you're trans and you're also a person of color, so intersectionality. So you can see that the 17% of the respondents to this survey who are Black said that they were denied a home or apartment in the past year due to their being transgender. And you might wonder how you would know that. A lot of times people will tell you, I don't want you here, or I don't have to rent to you. I don't like the way you dress. You should look more like a man or a woman, or any number of things. And if you think about some of the identity documents or other things that you need to purchase a house or to rent an apartment, you're going to need probably some sort of form of ID, and you're going to need deposits. So it's maybe a security deposit, a first month's rent, something to that effect. So both of those things implicate the fact that you might need to be employed or have access to government benefits that's going to pay for your housing. But again, we know that statistically, transgender people and non-binary people, gender non-conforming people have a harder time encountering and accessing the resources from those systems. Next, please. So again, here are some of the statistics about the access to housing. And we know that being out of home negatively impacts your ability to get and keep a job. So if you don't have an address to put on the top of a resume, or to submit for a background check, or a clean place to sleep and to shower, you're going to have a harder time holding down a job. And we know that a lot of transgender people end up being out of home. And that's both youth populations, young adults, and adults as well. Next slide. So this is all very uplifting, and it just keeps getting better. When it comes to employment, there's absolutely across the board negative experiences by transgender people, perpetuated upon transgender people when they are trying to either obtain a job or keep a job after transitioning, or keep a job when they come out as something other than cisgender. And what is really hard about these statistics is that it is incredibly difficult to prove employment discrimination, particularly when you just didn't get the job. It's also hard to prove housing discrimination when you're just not given the opportunity to apply for that housing. So a lot of times people feel like they're left with no recourse when they are denied jobs.
Well, Celeste, I just want to jump in before we continue, just to check to see if there are any questions. And I do see some questions in the question box, because you've presented a lot of great information. Mm-hmm. Maybe there's something that you can answer that may be related to some content that you've already presented. So Stephanie, can you let me know if there are any questions, or should we continue?
Hi, sorry. Yes, there are a few questions that have come in that can sort of relate in different ways. We have one that asks, what are the direct ways to help Black and Indigenous, trans, non-binary, two-spirit people besides mutual aid?
Hire transgender people, create a work environment where it is easy to be Black and or Indigenous, transgender, non-binary, two-spirit. Make sure like that you are not insisting on unnecessary legal documents or proof of residency. Just trying to decrease some of the systemic barriers that are present for those folks so that we can live normal lives. And I defer to Alexa as well.
Alexa?
Yeah, I think create opportunities for our community, and what I'm trying to say with this is like giving them job, trainings to them for them to be able to work, stuff like that. Hire them, so that would be amazing.
Wonderful. And in the spirit of creating more opportunities, there's another question about increasing inclusivity in environments. So the question is, how can educators create more inclusive learning environments for TGNB, which stands for Transgender and Gender Non-Binary Youth?
Normalizing the trans and gender non-binary experience. It doesn't have to be a special holiday to read a book or about somebody who's trans or non-binary, or to just put in a gender neutral pronoun into a math problem. It doesn't have to always be about heroes and holidays. It can just be including somebody in a science experiment. I don't know, anything to kind of just bring our experiences into the daily fold, and so that it doesn't feel so foreign to folks, because it's not.
Yeah, use also flyers, posters, stuff that are related with community. Don't use the CDC ones because I don't like CDC ones. But use affirmative flyers, things like that that people can see, and they will feel include in there.
And we have two other questions, not so much related to systemic barriers or what you were just presenting, but just about gender identity and experiences overall.
So Stephanie, yeah, let's hold that. I want,
that's what I figured.
I want Celeste to continue with her presentation.
Wonderful.
Then we could go back to that. Okay.
Sounds good.
So thank you.
No problem.
Okay, Celeste, back to you. I'm
Roll
going
it on
to the next slide.
Next one. These are for your reference as to like how people, when faced with anti-transgender discrimination, react. We tend to go back in the closet. We don't necessarily stand up for ourselves because we've already been shamed for a good portion of our lives. So just because you feel it, if you feel like, oh, well, we don't have any transgender or non-binary people here, it might be that you don't have an environment where it is safe for people to come out. So take a look at what you can do to kind of normalize being transgender or gender nonconforming, and perhaps there will be more people who are open and honest about their identities. Next slide. Again, horrible statistics. You can go on to the next slide.
So here is time for a poll question, and we'd like all of you to participate in this poll question, and it asks, how many of your organization's forms can be changed to be more transgender or to be more accessible for transgender and non-binary people? People are voting. Mhm. I hear them thinking.
Responses are coming in.
And I
You're
see
at-
some, all of them, so that's good. Lots of work to be done.
So maybe we could take a few more seconds. If you can put in your vote, your response. We're going to close it in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
This is interesting. Celeste, what is your take on these participant responses?
I think that there's a lot of honesty in these participant responses. And I think that it is great that everybody sees that there can at least be, most people are saying there can be some change. And I know that we, in my firm and through Trans Affirming Alliance, we look quarterly at our forums just to make, and what we're asking people to make sure that we're not missing something. So thank you. And I'm hoping that since you've identified that that can happen, that you're going to go back to your organizations and change those forms. Okay, next slide, Brenda, whenever you're ready.
Okay.
Do I have?
Thank you.
All right, so we talked about some of the, everything's kind of intersectional, right? Like legal hurdles or systemic barriers. And we did talk about, insurance denials for transition related care, flagged TELDIF as a resource for people. There are a lot of just processes and paperwork and bureaucracies to deal with. So the name change process includes the courts, but then what people have to do is take that court order to every single place that ever issued them an identification document and try to change their name. The easiest way to analogize what this is like is that if you've ever gotten married and changed your name, you still get catalogs from your former name, decades later. Means you have to go and talk to whatever, catalog you're getting, but that the organizations and the entities don't talk to one another. So it takes time and resources in order to actually effectuate your name change. And gender marker changes are sometimes a completely separate standard. Some states for their documents require a court order confirming somebody's legal or somebody's gender, meaning it's just verified by court order. Some only require an affidavit from somebody attesting to what their own gender identity is. On federal ID documents, sometimes you have to provide a medical a letter from a medical doctor saying that if you're going from one binary gender marker to the other, that you've had appropriate clinical treatment. So there are a lot of very practical reasons why folks would have different names and different gender markers on a variety of different documents. And then we are going to be seeing a lot more difficulties because of the Real ID Act, which means that states are requiring, or they have to require more identification in order to issue driver's licenses. So when there are identification document changes, it also impacts transgender people. It will impact people who are undocumented. And so then if you're undocumented and transgender, again, intersectionality, those overlap one another. So next slide. All right, so we did this already, right? So now you should kind of be able to talk back to your organizations, or even to talk to your transgender clients and say, like, what is a legal name really? Maybe it's not really a thing, but do you need a court order to change your name on this particular document? What is a legal gender? And I'll tell you, it's a fiction. And then talking, and this is really state by state. What are some of your basic rights in public spaces? What are some of your basic rights in housing and in employment? And I just want to flag for you that the Equality Act is still making its way, I believe, through Congress, and I believe it's made its way through the House, but it would be a federal law that says that you are not allowed to be discriminated against on the basis of a lot of things, including your gender identity or sexual orientation in employment, housing, and public spaces. So right now it's just a patchwork of state rights that say what can and can't, you can be discriminated based upon. So federal protections, all your senators, I'm not allowed to advocate on those things, but you really need to know what's going on in your state, but just assume that if your basic human rights are being violated, that somebody's probably violating a law. Next.
Yes, thank you so much, Celeste. This information that you shared was very enlightening, very eye-opening, and it's so evident as to how much more work needs to be done to increase equity for transgender and non-binary persons. And that's where all of the service providers that are participating here today, they can contribute, they can make an impact, they can serve as allies. I mean, I'm sure that both of my speakers will agree. So we hope that not only will you take this information, this newfound knowledge will inspire you to actually learn more, but not only to learn more, but to actually do something with that information. You know, go back and like Celeste says, the organization reviews and revises, documentation on a quarterly basis. I mean, so these are things that a service provider can do to take action, to actually take a closer look at what's happening within your organization, within your clinics, within your health centers, so that things can move and be assessed and revised. But so thank you so much to both of you. We do want to, again, I realize that it is exactly 3:30. So we did complete the content, but for those of you who still have a couple of questions, this is really, we want to allow this opportunity for you to still ask your questions. And Celeste, if you can hang on a couple of more minutes, we would, and Alexa, if possible, we would really appreciate it. So that way, we can answer those questions that people still have. So Stephanie, would you like to read a couple of questions that we still have?
Yes, we have 4 questions. And the first one is, how would you find a gender identity that you feel most comfortable in if you are still struggling with your own identity? So I can read that again. How would you find a gender identity that you feel most comfortable in if you are struggling with your identity?
Like trying on clothes, you try it out, see how it works. Talk to people who are safe. I know a lot of Facebook groups, Instagram groups, people to follow, posting pictures, like just, try it. There's no harm. And again, there's no legal requirement that you change your gender markers or change your name. So explore.
I will just add, listen to yourself and no one else. People can say, you're transgender woman, you're transgender man, you're non-binary. They can assume that, but you are the only person who can see through yourself who you are.
Explore what's right for you. Beautiful. The other question is, what recommendations do you have for explaining the use for using gender neutral Spanish that some people may not be familiar with? So recommendations for explaining the use of gender neutral Spanish for people who may not be familiar with it.
I will say have patience, because Spanish is really horrible. It's really masculine. it has a lot of patriarchy terms. So be patient and normalize it. You know, we live in 2021, and it's time for everyone to be more diverse. And I see in the youth, they don't care about pronouns. They don't care about things that we already use. So I think the problem are the adults. I don't want to offend anyone, but it's really hard with adults to understand the terminology that is evolving.
Thank you. The other question is, where can I obtain resources for learning more inclusive language for our Latinx, Hispanic X population? I hardly see this type of learning opportunity promoted. So places where people can find resources for learning more inclusive language for the Hispanic X and Latinx community.
I think GLAD has a list of resources. Also Facebook group. There are people as well who are teaching others to learn inclusive Nahuatl, for example, which is a language from Mexico and some part of Central America. So just look in the internet and you might find something interesting.
Which can vary. And last question with it, which it looks like Celeste might already be answering. So maybe you want to verbally answer the question is, how do you even approach people who think that transgender folks do not exist?
Okay, so I started typing. Number one, you approach them with caution because just be safe. And number two, you can take a screenshot of me or send them to my website and just be like, look, there's a transgender person who exists and who's an adult and who's over the age of 35. Because I often get the transgender people are, they're young, they don't know what they're doing, they're just messing with their identities. Like, no, I'm a transgender lawyer and I will happily show you other people who are successful professionals who are transgender. And I don't mean to be flippant about that. I'm dead serious because it's important to know that we exist.
Yes, thank you for that.
And there also is a hand risen in one of our attendees, Beverly. So do we have a chance to take that, Brenda?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so Beverly, you are unmuted. Oh, actually, now you can unmute yourself. Beverly Kerr Caesar. Okay, I guess. Okay, well, feel free to put it in the chat if you still want to ask your question or make a comment. And that was it for our questions.
Okay, thank you so much. These are, we encourage you, I put up a slide on recommended organizations and resources. We encourage you to visit these websites and access these resources. As I said earlier, you will receive the PowerPoint slide set with resources after today's session. And, you know, I just want to, before I give both of the speakers an opportunity to make their closing comments, I want to say increasing your transgender and non-binary competence, as both speakers alluded to, is a lifelong learning process, but we have to choose to participate in the process and also take active steps to contribute and make impact. So I would like to give both of our speakers an opportunity to make some closing remarks, and we are wrapping it up. So Alexa, would you like to make a final comment?
Yes, I'm still in the airport. I want to thank my ancestors. I'm in the land of Pipiles here in San Salvador, and I want to honor them. And I asked permission in the beginning. I didn't do it here, but I asked permission to be here in this land, and I'm so happy for this presentation to happen because we can learn together and put in practice. You know, I'm so amazed by all of the people who has been asking for the presentation, because that means that they're interested to learn. So thank you for being here. And I'm so sorry for the noise in the background. I didn't want to miss that. So I talked with Brenda. I'm in the airport. I'm hoping to join the webinar. So thank you for allowing me to be here.
No problem. And actually, I didn't hear any background noise, so it worked out. It worked out really well. Under the circumstances, it worked out really well. Yes. Celeste.
Yeah, and thank you. Yeah, I was so excited to be invited to this and also to be speaking with Alexa, because we don't often get a chance to have more than one transgender person on a panel. So don't forget, when you're putting together panels, you know, you can have more than one transgender person. You can even have like a whole panel full of transgender people.
Yes.
Because we do exist. And you know, I guess one final thing is to try to take what we've done and walk through your organization, because if you're committed to hiring a transgender person, what you want to do is hire them and have them want to stay there. So looking at how people, both internally as employees and clients, so more external facing people, are interacting with your systems, and make sure that they are accessible and affirming on both sides. So thank you all for coming. It's so exciting when people want to learn more about helping trans people.
Yes, definitely. And I'm just going to backtrack to the slide prior, that, you know, both of the organizations that our speakers represent are on this on the resource list. So I urge you to visit their websites, learn more about their organizations. There's volunteer opportunities. There's different opportunities posted on these websites, and some of the resources that Celeste recommended are on this as well. And anything else that we put together before we actually send out the email will be included as well. And also the recording of this as well. So please, we welcome you to use these resources and share with us if you find other even better additional resources. You can always email us. And I got permission from both speakers to provide these email addresses in case you want to contact them directly after today's session. This is their information. But if you have other questions that you want to direct to us to Proceed, here is our contact information where you can reach us, Proceed's National Center for Training, Support, and Technical Assistance. And we do have one more session in our Raising Voices series, which will be focused on refugee needs and awareness. It's going to be held on June 22nd. So please stay tuned for additional information. You can pre-register now to attend this session. It is the last in our series, our year-long series that we held, the 5th session. Now this, just as a note, this session was originally scheduled to take place on June 8th, and we did need to change the date. So if you are already registered, please reach out to us if something has, if your availability has changed, but it has been scheduled for June 22nd. And I'd like to just remind you that please complete the evaluation form. It will appear as soon as you exit today's session. It only asks a couple of questions and it won't take long for you to complete at all. So we urge you to complete it because we really do read these evaluations and use them to improve our programming. So please do that. And thank you so much. This ends our session today, and I want to thank all of you for really taking the time out to expand your knowledge on transgender and non-binary competence. And if there's anything else, any additional information that we can provide you, please reach out. So Stephanie, if you want to add a comment, but this is the end of our session.
Thank you everyone for attending, and we were more than happy to have you. We hope to see you for future webinars.
Okay, thank you so much. This is the end.
Thank you. Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Adios.
Bye, Alexa. Safe travels.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. Welcome, Amina. So I know that I was available for a feedback session, but we still have, people are slowly but surely signing off. We can schedule another phone call, or we can just reconnect, end this session and reconnect. Thank you so much. I think Alexa, are you still with us or no? Is she? Okay, yeah. That worked out actually well, even though she was in the airport. And it really did not, there was no background noise that I heard or anything like that. So that was great.
That was the quietest
I think-
airport I've ever heard. It was loud.
Yeah, so she found it. I don't know what spot, but she found a good spot. Yeah, so you're welcome, Patty. I think that it's probably better to just schedule something else, but thank you so much, Celeste, for taking the time out. And I almost feel like we need to do this again soon, but yes. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm always game, except when I can't be around.
Okay, I'll talk to your peoples. I know, I gotta talk to your peoples.
Talk to the people. I know you got to talk to the people. There's other documents that you need from the people. No, but thank you. This has been very pleasant overall. And thank you, Stephanie. It's nice meeting you. Ciao.
My
Okay,
pleasure.
take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Have a great week. Bye-bye.